Father David here. It's the first Sunday in Lent, and it's time for your weekly sermon. Today we find Jesus in the desert confronting Satan, and the title of today's sermon is What's First? Why do we find ourselves in the desert with Jesus this morning? What's going on in his encounter with this adversary of God, the one we call Satan? What's at stake in this seemingly God-forsaken place? At first, it seems that Jesus is confronted with the three most common temptations that humans face, those shiny beads that often mesmerize us, the temptation to be well fed, turn this stone into bread, and satisfy your hunger forever, the temptation to be powerful, worship me and you'll rule over every kingdom of the world, making you the envy of every dictator and strongman, the temptation to be famous. Throw yourself off the temple, and God will miraculously save you, and people will beg for your autograph and admire your face on the cover of People magazine. These are the common temptations we all face in one form or another as we muddle through this life, as we struggle with the family budget, as we wonder whether we'll be comfortable in retirement, as I wring my hands over what the neighbor might be thinking about me. But what's happening in the desert this morning isn't only about a fat belly or lording it over others or becoming a famous Freddy. The confrontation between Jesus and the devil is about power, the power to create bread and therefore to become a source for hungry people to be fed, a power too often used to manipulate people, to dominate them, to enslave them. As in the famous story of the Grand Inquisitor when Jesus returns to a small Italian village in the 1500s. He comes softly, unobserved, and yet strange to say, everyone knows who he is. And he sets about healing people, even raising up a small child from the dead. The cardinal, the Grand Inquisitor, who enforces the rules of the church, promptly has Jesus arrested. And then he confronts Jesus about his return. You offer people freedom, but we give them bread, and people will always choose bread over freedom. And that leads to the second temptation about power during this struggle in the desert, the power to rule over others. Worship me, and all of these kingdoms will be yours to command. We see this playing out tragically today in Ukraine. A Russian dictator decides that he's going to rule over a sovereign nation and causes the death of thousands upon thousands of innocents. Third, and the most tempting power of all, the power to command God to act. That is also offered by Satan to Jesus this morning. He will save you if you throw yourself down from the temple heights. We see that power on display when we look at what's called the prosperity gospel, that warped form of Christianity that says, God owes me. As one writer puts it, the gospel of prosperity turns Christianity into a vapid, bless me club with a doctrine that is little more than spiritual, magical thinking. If you pray the right way, God will make you rich. So perhaps this time in the desert isn't only about common temptations, but it's also about power, how we seek it, how it corrupts. And like Jesus does with the common temptations, so he does with the temptations to power. Jesus, because he is following a different vision, rejects these temptations. But I think something else is also playing out in the desert this morning, something even more profound than merely rejecting the common temptations, something more profound than walking away from the lure of power, something that is instead cosmic, something that is fundamental to the fabric of creation. Today in the desert, that age-old question is asked, what came first? the chicken or the egg? Not literally the chicken or the egg, but the fundamental what comes first question. As in, what comes first, the material world or consciousness? Science teaches us that it all began with the Big Bang, and from that came matter. And eventually, from all of that matter, came us with our big brains. And from our big brains comes consciousness. According to science, since the brain creates consciousness, when we die, our consciousness dies as well, which is a major reason of why we have wars and racism and greed and all of the other evils of humanity, because there is something inside of us that says, this is all there is. So grab what you can while you can, because it ain't lasting forever. Well, that is Satan's view, and thus the focus on fame, fortune, and power. But what if consciousness actually exists before the Big Bang? What if consciousness caused the Big Bang? What if consciousness creates matter and then uses matter, occupies matter like the brain, but is not constrained, controlled, or limited by it? Isn't that the great drama playing out in the desert this morning? The devil insists that the material world is all there is, and he dares Jesus to agree. Jesus, however, sits with the truth that this world is only a way station, that spirit and thought and consciousness exist before and independently of the material world, and will continue after this material world is transformed into the new heaven and new earth. These two ways of understanding reality bring us to a fork in the road. They set before us profoundly different ways to live life, and it forces us to reimagine what we think our faith is all about. Christianity has come to be seen as simply a private relationship between a person and God, a God who, if I cross certain T's and dot certain I's, I will secure that condominium in the sky when I die in the sweet by and by. But that's not Jesus. The Christian faith is not a set of personal values or spiritual preferences. It's a claim about the very nature of reality itself. That, as Paul comes to see so vividly, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Through him all things are created in heaven and on earth. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. We are invited to see that through compassion and self-giving, through self-emptying and generosity, we are invited to glimpse this ultimate reality, that all that is not only connected, but that all that is indeed one. It allows us to grasp the truth, as Teilhard de Chardin says, that the cosmos is fundamentally and primarily alive, and that Christ, through the incarnation, is rooted in the world, right down to the tiniest atom, even in the vast expanse of interstellar space. None other than Thomas Aquinas, the great doctor of the church, declared that in Christ, God becomes human so that humans may become God, sharing in the divine nature, which I know is hard to believe these days. Looking around at the world as it is often leaves us shaking our heads and wondering if anything faith says is true. And yet, our age and the age of the first century, when Jesus walked these dusty roads, have far more in common than we usually think. Both are scared frightened ages, caught under principalities and powers where we tiny little humans know that we cannot do much, that we are not in control, that we are just trapped, so says Kirster Stendhal. But we are not tiny little human beings. We are beings created in the very image of God. We are co-creators with the God who is in all things, guides all things, loves all things. The divine holds all things, gives birth to all things. As Nicholas of Cusa observed, the divine is in all things, and all things are in the divine. This is the great drama playing out in the desert this morning. It's a drama that demands an answer from us, just as it demands an answer from Jesus. Shall we claim our inheritance as children of God, as beloved companions of the consciousness that holds all things together? Or shall we exchange our heritage, our destiny, for some shiny beads? This is Lent. What shall our answer be? God bless you all.